Respected Professor Rishikesh Krishnan, Director IIM Bangalore, Professor Gurumurthy, Professor Sadish Vasu Kailas, and Mr. Raj Vagre, members of NDISC, and my dear participants. This is one of the happiest and proud moment for NDISC. We are conducting a webinar with a well-known personality, Professor Rishikesh T. Krishnan, Director of IIM Bangalore. I cordially invite our chief guest to this webinar. I also invite our faculty members, Professor Gurumurthy, Professor Sadish Vasu Kailas, and Mr. Raj Vagre to this event. I'm very glad to share that we have a 500 more registration for this event from different institutions from India and even from abroad. I invite all of them to this webinar. With this, I would like to wind up the welcome speech and handing over to Mr. Sudeep, General Secretary of NDISC.
So speaking about entrepreneurship and innovation IISc, NIISc is a forum in Indian Institute of Science which focuses on developing entrepreneurial ecosystem and strives on bringing student community more closer to the startup culture. We aspire to achieve these goals by bringing some of the chief players in entrepreneurial world to conduct talks, webinars, seminars, pitch events, and workshops. And we also are willing to provide assistance to the student startup through our startup service cell program. And we are being backed by Society of Innovation and Development, which is the deep science incubator of Indian Institute of Science, and which is also incubated some of the startups like Bellatrix Aerospace, which is looking forward to launch their own rocket by 2023, and also Minvax, which is working on the COVID-19 vaccine. And in the following event, we have invited the director of IIM Bangalore, Professor Rishikesha Krishnan. I would like to hand it over to the Vice President of Events, Fatima Sana, to carry forward and give a introduction about the speaker. Thank you.
Respected dignitaries and all my dear friends, I do hereby introduce today's speaker, Professor Rishikesh Krishnan, on behalf of NDISC. Professor Rishikesh Krishnan is the current director of IIM Bangalore and professor of strategy. He also served as director of IIM Indo from 2014 to 2018. He is listed as Thinker 50 India list as the most influential management thinker. He has around 140 publications, which include journal, popular press, case studies, and books. He is the author of 2 books on innovation. The first one, From Jugaad to Systematic Innovation, The Challenge from India, and the other is 8 Steps to Innovation, Going from Jugaad to Excellence. The following talk is going to be based on his book, 8 Steps to Innovation, Going from Jugaad to Excellence. Any queries from attendees' side can be posted in the Q&A session and will be addressed after the talk. I do hereby welcome Professor Rishikesh Krishnan for the most awaited talk. Thank you all.
Yeah, hi, very good afternoon to all of you, and sorry for the delay, which is due to some setup problems at my end. So it's a real pleasure to speak to all of you at Indian Institute of Science, which is of course India's premier science and engineering institute, and also has a very strong history of startups and both faculty members and students, as well as alumni being involved in a lot of creative startups. So today I'm going to focus on the topic of innovation for startups. As was mentioned in the introduction, this is based on our book, 8 Steps to Innovation, Going from Jugaad to Excellence. Of course, this book was written a few years back before the digital era completely dawned on us. But I'm going to give you a perspective focusing on the latest developments in digital, but at the same time using the framework which we developed in our book. So what did we say in our book? Basically, in our book, we were focused on trying to understand how can an organization go about building what we call a systematic innovation capability. What is a systematic innovation capability? It's the ability to innovate on a continuing basis. This is a challenge both for startups and for established companies. And in our research, we identified 3 big problems which organizations face in making innovation a sustained activity. The first one is to have a continuous pipeline of ideas. The second one is to ensure that these ideas get taken forward and developed. And the third challenge is converting these ideas into successful products and services. In other words, to have a good impact of the innovation that's happening in the organization. So many organizations find that either they're not able to come up with enough ideas, which is the first problem, or even if they come up with the ideas, they're not able to develop them and take them to fruition. Or sometimes they find a problem that even though they have developed the ideas, they are not getting the kind of returns or the kind of results which they were looking for. So how do you solve these problems? To solve these problems, we came up with this 8-step framework, where we said that to build a pipeline, there are 3 things you need to do. You need to lay a strong foundation, which is essentially identify what kind of innovation best suits your organization. You need to create what we call a challenge book, which is a set of the core innovation problems which you want to solve. We want to create and build participation in the innovation process. This may not be so much of a problem in small companies, but it's a big problem in large companies. Then in order to address the problem of velocity, we said you need to have a system that encourages experimentation at low cost with high speed. You need to be able to move quickly from prototype to incubation. Many organizations, they find that things get stuck at the prototype stage because the risks and investment involved go up substantially at that stage. You need to be able to iterate on the business model. That's another important step towards moving your innovation activity forward. Finally, in order to enhance your batting average, you can use some tools like Sandbox, innovation platforms, open innovation, and you can create a margin of safety. In other words, manage risk effectively in the organization. Now, as I mentioned, some of these are bigger challenges in large organizations, but the focus of my talk today will be on the innovation challenges in startups. So I'm going to take from this 8 steps framework, the steps which are most relevant to the startup context, and I'm going to speak about this. So the first issue I would like to focus on is this whole question of ideas. Now you recall just a couple of minutes back, I mentioned that core to innovation is coming up with a good idea pipeline. But is it okay to come up with any ideas? What kind of ideas ultimately result in successful innovation? This is a very important question. And we would argue that you will have the successful innovation happening when your ideas address what we call the right problems. What are these right problems? I will tell you in just a minute. In the meantime, let me give you an example of 2 startups which in the current COVID context, to my mind, are solving the right problem. So this is a first focus on a startup called Cloud Physician. Cloud Physician is based in Bangalore. They are trying to solve a very significant problem, both in COVID and non-COVID times. And that is that the people who manage intensive care units in hospitals, that is the doctors who have the special skills to manage an ICU, who are called intensivists, they are very much in short supply. They're also very expensive. So how do you continue to run and sustain an ICU? Or as in the COVID context, how do you scale up ICU at short notice? So the problem which Cloud Physician is trying to solve is the lack of availability of highly skilled critical care personnel, inefficient utilization of ICU infrastructure and services, partly because of this lack of skilled personnel. Resultant is your inability to deliver quality care, and you result in medical and diagnostic errors which lead to missed treatment opportunities. So this is the problem statement. Their solution is what they call Radar, which is an integrative smart ICU system. This basically uses the principles of telemedicine to provide a centralized command center with 24/7 trained intensivists. They are able to generate automated early warnings so that you get actionable decision support, and they're able to provide diagnostic assistance. So what this means is, even in the ICU, if you have a doctor who is not trained to be an intensivist, he gets backroom support from through this radar system and is able to manage the patients in the ICU. So you can see the utility of this in particularly in the COVID kind of situation, where you're trying to create additional capacity in ICU, but you may not be having the infrastructure required to create additional ICUs at short notice. In fact, I know of an organization which has set up a COVID care center along with an ICU at very short notice, just in a matter of 2 to 3 weeks. And they are depending on the background support of Cloud Physician to manage this facility. Let me give you another way of looking at this problem, this whole problem of ICU. Another interesting startup is a company called Dozy. This was started by two alumni of IIT Indore, Mudit and Gaurav, who you can see in the picture. So what they first started with is interesting. They actually started to look at sleep monitoring, and they were trying to address a condition called sleep apnea. And how they did that is by keeping a sensor under the mattress and monitoring the sleep patterns of the person who was suffering from sleep apnea overnight when the person was sleeping. But when COVID came about as a big challenge, they realized that their technology can be used for a different problem. That is continuous monitoring of the vital parameters of COVID patients. So now their system runs on the same principle. It essentially is a remote monitoring system where they have sensors which monitor 4 critical parameters: oxygen saturation, respiration rate, heart rate, and blood pressure. And they basically communicate this both to an attendant as well as to a doctor who can monitor the condition. It also generates alarms. So if there is any sudden dip in any of these parameters, action can be taken. I hope you're getting the idea that, if you really want to come up with successful innovation, you must start with the right problem. If you start with a problem that is of interest to a very small number of people, or which is not very significant, or is just a excuse because you want to develop a certain technology, then it's very unlikely that your startup will have a lot of traction from that innovation. So let's try to put a little bit of shape into this. What are the characteristics we can use to describe the right problem? Let me give you another example to explain this point. Some years back, I was on the jury of the NASSCOM Innovation Awards. And as part of this, we had given an award that year to a company called Vigyan Labs. What is special about Vigyan Labs? Vigyan Labs realized that today a lot of computing is shifted to the cloud. But because it's shifted to the cloud, it doesn't mean there are no computers. There are large banks of servers which are essentially doing all that computing in the background. And those data centers which consist of those computers are known to guzzle huge amounts of power. So they realize that there is a significant problem. There is a pain point, huge amount of power being used. And not only is a huge amount of power being used, a lot of that power is being wasted, because many times multiple computers or multiple servers in that network are on even when their computing power is not being utilized. So essentially they realized if they could reduce the power consumption in a data center, that would be a very significant development. And they have developed a software-based solution which essentially reduces the power consumed in a data center by up to 30%. There are 3 characteristics which we saw in companies like Vigyan Labs, which indicate that this is really a good problem to solve. First, does it represent a major pain point? And you can see here the major pain point is the power consumption. Does it represent a wave? A wave is a trend or any kind of new development that is happening. And here the wave is shifting of computing to the cloud. And does it involve waste? And you can see here that the data centers are wasting 90% or more of the electricity they are pulling off the grid. So 3 interesting characteristics of the right problem. Does it represent a pain point? Does it reflect a wave or a trend? Does it represent waste? Waste of energy, waste of material, waste of human manpower. Any of these constitute a waste. So the right problem basically involves pain, wave, and waste. So let me just elaborate a little bit further on this. Let's look at one successful product and one not so successful product and see what are some of the differences we can see in the development process or the innovation process leading to these two products. The first one is the successful one. This is the Tata Ace. You must have seen it on the road. There are more than 1 million, I think now it's close to 2 million vehicles built on the platform of the Tata Ace. This was arguably the most successful light commercial vehicle from India. Imitation is often the best indicator that a product is successful, and you would have seen that both Mahindra and Ashok Leyland have products they subsequently launched to compete with the Ace. So the Ace is undoubtedly a very successful product. But the same company, Tata Motors, also produced another product which many of you are familiar with, which is the Tata Nano, which was far from successful. So one of the interesting questions is, why did the Ace succeed so well, and why did the Nano really struggle and ultimately have to be stopped? So when you look back at the process, you will get some insights from this. Of course, if you ask Tata Motors, they tell you a simple reason. They say the Nano got wrongly positioned as a cheap car, and a car is an aspirational product. So once this wrong positioning happened, no one was interested in buying it. But there's another question you should ask. Why did that wrong positioning happen in the first place? And the clue to that, in my view, is actually in the product development process itself. Let's look at the product development process for the Ace, or the innovation process for the Ace. It started by identifying an important opportunity, the need for a safe and comfortable last mile vehicle to transport goods. For example, the earlier vehicles which were transporting goods for last mile delivery were either this three-wheeler auto rickshaw type delivery van, or of course animal power. These are the standard methods through which goods were being delivered. It needed to compete with three-wheelers on cost, because obviously it had to be cost competitive. But at the same time, Tata Motors realized that adding a fourth wheel would add status to the vehicle owner. And they also realized that aesthetics and ergonomics were becoming much more important. So how did they go about identifying what the product should look like as far as the Ace is concerned? They did a very elaborate process of identifying user needs. They involved a lot of users and stakeholders in the process. They interviewed about 600 different drivers, owners, mechanics, opinion makers, etc. And they tried to understand their needs by listening to their need statements, and they derived the product specifications from these need statements. And customers were involved at every stage. For example, one of their customers in the target market said, if I have a four-wheeler, then I will get a better marriage proposal. So Tata Motors interpreted this as saying the fourth wheel adds prestige to the vehicle, and therefore we should create a four-wheel solution, not a three-wheel solution. At the same time, they realized that the product has to be designed to cost. The cost per ton per kilometer was critical. And in fact, management went so far as to tell the team that the project would be abandoned if it did not meet cost requirements. They also tried other innovations. They tried to get their suppliers more involved, co-located them, made them partners, tried to scale down the Indica engine, tried to create a service network which was dedicated for the Ace in small towns, created a network which was as close to the customers as possible. All of these, of course, supplemented the core effort. They also had a team which was very young and could relate to the target market, which was young first-time businessmen who were setting up their own van. And when you contrast this with the process followed for the Nano, you'll see that the Nano process was very, very different. What was the Nano process about? Some of you might remember that the Nano process was quite secretive. It was largely done under the direct supervision of the chairman, Mr. Ratan Tata. Mr. Tata, of course, was very well intentioned. He spent a lot of his time trying to develop or have the Nano developed as a product. But unfortunately, they didn't get too much of market inputs. this elaborate market-driven process, which was followed in the case of the ACE, was not replicated in the case of the Nano, as per any information which is available in the public domain. So essentially, I think the core point I'm trying to make here is many of you, I'm sure, are very interested in technology. Technology is something you're all passionate about, but technology by itself is very difficult to convert into successful innovation. Technology needs to be linked to the market. It needs to be aligned with the market. And you'll see that some of the most successful innovative products in history all had very strong market alignment. You might, all of you, remember the history of what is today the smartphone. The BlackBerry was probably the first step on the way to a smartphone. It was created at a time when corporate customers were very concerned about security. They were worried that all their employees are carrying critical data on their handphone. And therefore, BlackBerry's value proposition to customers was offering a very high level of security. And that's what customers wanted at that time. However, if you fast forward a few years, you realize that security was now being taken for granted. So it was no longer security that people were looking for. People were now looking for a very strong internet experience. They were looking for the ability to connect with a variety of applications. And that's the time you had two technologies coming in. First, the Apple iPhone from Steve Jobs, which created a smooth, integrated, intuitive multimedia experience, very user-friendly. And then, of course, Google on the Android platform, which went one step further by providing all this and more on an open platform. So again, I just like to underline the point here, which I've been making for a few minutes now, is you need market alignment. You need your product, your technology, your innovation to be aligned with the needs of the market. And in my view, the more market driven your innovation is, the more likely it is going to be successful. The second dimension I want to focus on today is the importance of experimentation. All of you as students of IISc, I'm sure do lots of experiments. But in the context of a startup, an experiment is very simple. An experiment is any activity that tests or validates assumptions. Any startup that you run would have a lot of assumptions buried in it. For example, about customers, about technology, about the utility, and so on. So you need to find a way of validating these different assumptions, and that is what experimentation is all about. So you can think of this in terms of two loops. The first major loop is to go from idea to proof of concept, or idea to demo, which is basically looking at validating certain technological assumptions, basically that the product or service will actually work and deliver whatever functionality is required. And the second set of assumptions relate to production and commercialization, which talk about whether you can scale it up efficiently and cost effectively for the customer, and at the same time provide the kind of value that the customer is looking for. So you need to be able to validate these assumptions, and that's a very important part of the entire innovation process. Some of you might have seen a movie called Social Network. If you haven't seen it, I would strongly recommend that you do it. It is based on the life of Mark Zuckerberg, the founder of Facebook. And if you see that movie, you'll see that they went through these loops very, very efficiently, just sitting in their college dorm rooms. In fact, the first one, idea to proof of concept loop, was completed in less than 3 months. And the transition from proof of concept to upscaling it and launching it was conducted in about 2 months. So that's really the kind of speed at which experimentation needs to happen, particularly in the digital and internet domain. So typically, when you look at internet kind of technologies, you will look at, for example, will people use it? Do you have the technology? Can you scale it? Can you monetize it? All of these will be assumptions that you need to test. Historically, by the way, this is very important to understand this difference, because it also made the difference between successful and unsuccessful platforms. Today, of course, we take Facebook for granted, but Facebook had many predecessors before it. One of the social networks before it was a network called MySpace, which in a way has gone into history. But there was a big difference between Facebook and MySpace. Facebook went where the users wanted to. It kept trying out new things, new applications, new features. It pushed technology to do what was needed to grow and sustain the network. And remember, a social network essentially succeeds by creating network effects. MySpace was very much in the old kind of a domain. It was more seen as a top-down based on historical data forecasts. The whole focus was on execution and scaling up rather than experimentation and learning. So this is very important, and of course, companies do it all the time now. Whether you're looking at a Uber, an Ola, Zomato, a Swiggy, they're constantly doing experiments to figure out what new features they should add and what features they should drop. And the great or really convenient thing about digital startups and digital companies is you don't have the problems of the past. If you were a consumer product company years back, you would have to sit with a focus group to discuss their experience. You would maybe just take an internal vote on which new feature to implement. You would do test marketing. But today in the internet era, a company like Google can constantly experiment, testing out new ideas, measure customer response, and build on what it learns. Typically, as some of you might already know, there are two types of experiments which are very important. Both of these are important, so I would urge you to pay attention to both. The first one is what we call convergent testing, which is, should I have feature A or feature B? Or will customers like this product or service at this price, or do I need to offer it at a lower price? This involves formal scientific experimental design. You ask a precise question or a finite set of questions, and you seek to get an answer based on rigorous analysis. So this is very much the kind of very research-driven approach to choosing a feature, which is what we call part of convergent experimentation. Divergent is, of course, much earlier in the process when you're trying to understand what should maybe perhaps be some of the characteristics of the product or service. You might think of putting a prototype in the hands of customers virtually. You may ask open-ended questions. You may basically just try to get some ideas which you can then pursue. So in the design thinking process, this would come much earlier when you're looking basically at the divergent phase, whereas the convergent experimentation comes much later in the process. And in fact, as I mentioned, and I just like to underline this, to innovate successfully, you need both convergent and divergent experiments at different stages and in different parts of your business. Successful innovation must balance both exploratory learning and confirmatory learning, that is generation of ideas and verification of ideas. And as a result of this approach, these days the innovation processes become much shorter. Typically, an automobile company used to take 4 or 5 years to develop a new car. Nobody has that luxury anymore, and people are realizing that you need to use these rapid experimentation methods to cut down the time it takes to develop a new product. Another related idea about experimentation that you might like to keep in mind is this, what we call doing the last experiment first. What does doing the last experiment first mean? It means test the most critical assumptions as early as possible. Let me repeat, test the most critical assumptions as early as possible. Why do you need to do this? Because if your critical assumption doesn't hold up, everything else that you do is going to be a waste. Let me give you an example. One of the first internet e-commerce companies was a company called Zappos.com, which started, a long time ago, maybe around the time of Amazon. And the founder of Zappos wanted to sell shoes online. When he first told his friends he's going to sell shoes online, his friends, laughed at him. They said, who would buy a shoe through an online store? So this became the most critical thing to test. Would people actually buy shoes online? And it was clear that unless this assumption was upheld, everything else that he would do would be a waste. So this is what we mean by doing the last experiment first. And Zappos.com founder did a very interesting thing. He just set up a very simple storefront on the internet. He sourced his shoes not from vendors or supply chain, but from a neighboring shoe store. And using the shoes from that neighboring shoe store, he was able to figure out what kind of shoes people would buy online and what they would not. So essentially, he did a low-cost experiment to figure out that, yes, indeed, this assumption could be upheld. What you also need to do is iterate on the business model. Remember, finally, at the end of the day, your innovation in your startup needs to be successful in the market. And what this also means is that the way you reach out to the market has to be the right way. One great example that I always like talking about is Shaadi.com. The guy who started Shaadi.com, Anupam Mittal, was a NRI in the US when he started this company. He thought that matrimonial was a natural opportunity for e-commerce, which of course it is. But he made some interesting decisions. His first decision was that he would target the boy or girl who was a prospectively going to get married. And he thought the best way of reaching these boys and girls was to advertise to them online. And the best way to charge them was through a subscription. 6 months later, he found that all of these things didn't seem to be working. In fact, his company wasn't getting the kind of traction he expected. So he asked his parents, remember he was an NRI in the US. So he asked his parents in India, can you advise me? Can you tell me what's going wrong? So they had some interesting advice for him. What they told him was, look, your customer itself is wrong. You should not be targeting the boy or girl, you should be targeting their parents, because the parents are the ones who are most worried about getting their son or daughter married. Remember, these were early days of the internet, so the parents were also not really available online. So the parents had to be reached through more conventional means and also through more conventional advertising and promotion. And the interesting part is that the parents were too smart to pay any money upfront. So the subscription model also had to be scrapped, and you had to go more to a model which was connected to the number of relevant proposals. So this kind of business model exploration or experimentation is critical to identifying the right business model which can enable you to be successful with your innovation in the startup. Increasingly, we are also seeing that collaboration is key for the success of startup innovation. Many of you might know that a young startup in Pune, MyLab Discovery Systems, was the first company in India to be licensed by ICMR with an RT-PCR test kit for COVID-19. But MyLab did not have the infrastructure, it did not have the resources to rapidly scale up and capitalize on its innovation. So they did something smart. They connected with Adar Poonawalla from the Serum Institute. They contacted Syngene here in Bangalore to help them with the reagents. And with very powerful partners like these, they were quickly able to scale up and get their RT-PCR test kit into the market, which of course was a significant success story. So today, a lot of innovation, even by startups, needs opening up and reaching out to other organizations, particularly larger organizations, in order to take your innovation closer to the market. Okay, I'm coming towards the end of my talk. I want to just speak a little bit about some specific aspects of the digital era. I have already spoken about some digital startups, but I think there are some aspects of the digital era which are important to focus on. The first one is making intelligent use of artificial intelligence and machine learning. The reason AI is so powerful is that it has two characteristics. It is both a general purpose technology like a motor or microprocessor was in an earlier generation, and it's also a method of invention like digital computing. So it's the combination of these two together that make AI and of course by association ML such powerful means for innovation. But how you use these is important. You could look at a company like Niramai, which is a startup again based from Bangalore, which is trying to come up with a way of detecting breast cancer early. Remember, the traditional methods for breast cancer detection either involve physical screening or involve, and of course, treatment involves radiation. So neither of these are very useful because of both social as well as health related concerns. So what Niramai has been able to do is to use a non-invasive method, which is thermal image processing, to do low cost, accurate, automated cancer screening for breast cancer. And thereby they're addressing one of the most significant, public health problems in India. So this is the kind of, again, a good problem to solve using AI or ML. The second point I want to make in the digital era is the importance of data. Many of you would know that today data is used in almost all areas. One of the big users of data is the financial services industry. Bajaj Finserv, which is a subsidiary of Bajaj Finance, has been one of India's most successful companies in the consumer finance or consumer lending space. And they do something interesting. They have issued credit cards and EMI cards to customers, which allow them to study their behavior. But they don't just depend on that. They also buy data from data firms like Equifax, and they integrate the data they get from Equifax with their own data from the EMI and credit cards, and are able to get a very strong sense of the credit history or the credit risk involved with a particular customer. As a result, using their mobile app, they're able to make loan approvals in a very short time, and their NPAs or non-performing assets or bad loans are within very reasonable limits. So that's how they have become one of the most successful personal finance companies in India by innovatively using data. What we are also seeing today is that the nature of competitive advantage has changed. Earlier, it was about products. It was maybe sometimes about the razor blade approach, where you don't make money out of the razor, but you make it out of the blades, or like Amazon, which makes money from ebooks, not from Kindle. But today, the most successful companies make their money from both network effects and complements. So if you think of some of the Chinese companies like WeChat and so on, you will see that they are able to combine both. They have very strong network of users, and they keep giving them complementary products, which not only increase their stickiness, but also increase the revenues they're able to generate from those customers. And finally, I think the nature of protection and the nature of getting value out of innovation is also changing. Traditionally, companies use intellectual property extensively to ensure they got value out of their innovation. A company like Gillette, for example, developed 57 patents over its Mach 3 razor. Yeah, you got the number right, 57 patents over its Mach 3 razor, covering every aspect. You can just see over the assembly, the blade geometry, the strip design, the guards for tactile sensation, every dimension of this product is covered. So you would have thought that with this very strong IP protection, Gillette was insulated from competition in the market. And yes, they were for a long time. But in the internet era, things have changed. For example, Dollar Shave Club is a digital native that doesn't have such a strong focus on IP, yet got acquired by Unilever and thus became a very strong competitor to Gillette. What does Dollar Shave Club depend on? It depends on understanding people's shaving behavior, providing them complete shaving kits which meet their shaving needs at regular intervals based on their shaving behavior. Essentially, it's a digital era company which is delivering convenience, which is delivering customization, which is delivering user friendliness at very low cost. So this is really the kind of model through which digital and database companies are challenging many of the traditional companies. So I've come to the end of my talk. Sorry that I went a little fast because of our late start. Just to sum up, the key thing is to choose the right problem to solve. And as I mentioned earlier, pain, wave, and waste are useful triggers to find the right problem. You remember the example I gave you of Vigyan Labs. Follow a market-driven process. This reduces risk and improves chances of success. Even if you are to start with driven by technology, make sure that you're constantly looking for a market to which this technology can fit. Remember Dozy, which started by addressing sleep apnea, but today is trying to give you remote tracking of vital parameters. And in your business, identify the key assumptions you have made regarding need, technology, production, and commercialization. Test these assumptions systematically and regularly. and pivot if these assumptions are not upheld. These are some of the core principles I believe are important for making innovation work in startups, which are aligned with our 8 steps to innovation framework. So I'm going to just stop now, and I don't know what's the process you're going to follow for questions, but if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
So, sir, there is a question from Abhinav Goswami. So, it's where there is an existing product in the category that is successful and the market is large enough, would you still recommend spending time on the feasibility loop when the entering the market as a later entrant?
Yeah, in that case, maybe you need to look at more closely what is the value proposition or differentiator which is enabling you to compete with the incumbent. That becomes very important because otherwise you are unlikely to get business, because you probably have to get people to shift away from the existing supplier or the existing competitor of yours in order to get customers to buy from you. So the most important thing to test in that case is whatever you think is your differentiator. Is that something which the customer also thinks is a differentiator? So your experimentation on your testing needs to be more focused on that.
Okay, thank you, sir. Sir, we have a question from Raj. Sir, does the framework also talk about funding needs of a startup? Any best practices advice?
No, we didn't talk directly about funding needs. We are more focused on how do you manage innovation in an organization. I think the funding of a startup, this is pretty well established. I think there are few things which any entrepreneur needs to do. Unless your startup needs very rapid scaling very early, it's probably better to bootstrap, because you can preserve value in the organization. If you dilute too early, you're unlikely to get a significant benefit from that. Of course, this advice does not apply if your startup inherently needs very rapid scaling in order to be successful. Then you might have to dilute early. But otherwise, generally, bootstrapping is a good idea. One of the challenges in funding is that there tend to be flavors of the season or fashion. For example, you would have remember at one point of time it was food delivery. Maybe today it is COVID related. Tomorrow it will be something else. So one of the big challenges is raising funding if you don't fall within the bracket of that current fashion or fad. Then you might have to look for specialized investors or angels who have little unorthodox approach to funding, who are willing to look at your startup idea, even though it's not aligned with the current fashion that's being followed.
Okay, thank you, sir. There was one more question. What is the most efficient way to build an MVP?
Most efficient way.
Yes.
I don't know what you mean by most efficient way. In general, efficiency would refer to time, would refer to money, would refer to people involvement. So I really don't know which dimension this question is referring to.
Okay, so the person who's asking the question if we can elaborate, great, thank you. How to penetrate into the market once to test the idea that firmed up?
Yeah, so I think there are multiple ways. Again, it's difficult to generalize on, because different products have different requirements. But I think some things are very important. One thing is, of course, identifying what is the right method for distribution or accessing the market. It depends on your product category. Certain products have very well established distribution structures, and it's difficult to bypass those structures. Certain others you can bypass. You might be able to go just straight away direct to customer, particularly through the internet. So you will have to really study and see what are the different ways in which you can reach the customer. So that's one important thing. Second important thing is, I think, also looking at whether you can find the right partners. Very many times go to market can be very expensive. It can also involve setting up a lot of infrastructure, and it may not be possible for a startup to do that. So partnership is often the way to go. If you look at, for example, in the biopharma domain, a lot of startups decide to partner with established pharma companies. That's because they understand the regulatory framework very well. They have the resources to go through all the phases of testing. They also have understanding of the certification requirements. And then ultimately they have a strong distribution network which can take the product to pharmacies and hospitals and doctors and so on. So essentially, I think the core here is understanding how does distribution or how does go-to-market happen in that particular business. Do you have to follow the time-tested method, in which case sometimes it's not all that easy to get in, but sometimes there could be ways of disrupting that as well. For example, through the internet. I mean, if you look at all the low-cost airlines, for example, when they first came in, one of the ways they were able to ramp up quickly is by going direct to customer through the internet rather than going through the existing channel of travel agents. So if you have options like that, that can also be a quick way of getting to the market.
Thank you, sir. There was another question regarding Shaadi.com. How does the entrepreneur take a pivot call versus persisting with assumptions?
Oh, that's a great question. I think essentially you have to be, faithful to the data. So that's where all these, doing rigorous testing as far as possible helps. In Shaadi.com case, of course, the way I told you the story, he just acted on his parents' advice. But you need to experiment and validate assumptions, as I mentioned multiple times in my talk, and you need to do rigorous experiments so that you can be sure of the results. So particularly when you're choosing between one feature and another, or choosing pricing, make sure that you structure the experiment in such a way that once the experiment is completed, you don't have a doubt. This means, for example, if you have a particular target market, making sure that you are testing the assumption with that particular target market, making sure there are no biases in the way you've constructed your sample. Things like that are very important to make sure that your assumption testing progress is rigorous and you can go by the results that you get from that.
Okay, there was another question. So expensive product for niche market or a cheap product for mass market? Which one is more risky?
I'm not sure the way these two things are structured are very different. See, if you are trying to address mass market, then obviously that means you need large volumes of customers. You need to be able to reach out in terms of mass market advertising and promotion and so on. So, and often it also means you might have to displace existing products or services, which is not that easy. So I would say it really depends a lot on whether you have that real value proposition, which is going to enable you to sustain the advantage of giving the mass market. Typically, many plays of that kind are cost reduction plays. For example, just going back to what I told you just now, low cost airline, it was a cost reduction play. So you got to make sure also you can sustain that kind of cost reduction. On the other hand, niche market with an expensive product involves very different model. A lot of the focus is on continuous innovation. You need to be able to continuously track what customers are looking for and provide that functionality to them. it's a challenge in terms of continuously pushing the frontier and staying aligned with what the customers are using for. Whereas in the other one, in the mass market, low margin kind of a situation, you're really looking at, can you continuously keep your costs down? So the challenges are very different, and I think it depends a lot on what is the kind of technology you have, how well you understand the market, and your ability to run these very two different types of models, which generally, one thing I can say for sure is that it's almost impossible to do both at the same time in the same company. You can't have one product which is niche and very high margin and another one which is very low margin and mass market. Usually it creates huge contradictions and is very difficult to do.
Okay. There's a question from Vishal Pandey. How is Blue Ocean strategy differ in the innovation process? Who are these hero organizations who think Blue Ocean and why? Can Blue Ocean be applied in standalone within organizations?
See, Blue Ocean has a lot of relevance when you are in markets which are quite saturated. Because Blue Ocean is basically saying you go into uncontested spaces. So you map out the entire, product user kind of scenario, and you look at those boxes where there are no competitors and you enter those. I would argue that in India, in most categories, you are far, far away from saturation. So do you really need to go into Blue Ocean is a question. Blue Ocean is very relevant to advanced markets which are mature, where products are already highly penetrated in the market, saturation has already set in. In India, in most categories, it's still a young market with, of course, COVID interruptions now, but otherwise a lot of growth potential. So in that kind of a context, I don't know whether it really is all that important to pursue Blue Ocean. Blue Ocean has also got lots of risks, by the way, because you're going into uncontested space. It also means the cost of educating customers, establishing the category, establishing its need. All of this can take a long time and can involve a lot of resources. So while the absence of competition may look attractive, there are other costs and risks involved in pursuing Blue Ocean strategy.
There was a good question regarding the right problem to solve. How would it be in the case of startup idea, which is based on completely new space, new market or ideas which are not yet explored? How would we proceed in that case?
Yeah, so of course that always exists. That's a bit like it's a similar to the Blue Ocean question, because essentially what you're talking about is uncontested and open spaces where other people are not there. So, Steve Jobs was asked this question many times. He was asked this question, why don't you do conventional market research? How do you know what customers need? And Steve Jobs had a very standard response. He used to tell people, if I go and ask customers, they will only tell me about what they have experienced, what they are familiar with. They won't be able to tell me about needs which they themselves may not have even imagined. So my job is to imagine those needs which customers themselves have not thought of. But there was a caveat to that. Steve Jobs and his close team were also kind of, techno geeks, in the sense that they were constantly trying to push the frontier or the margin for themselves. So they were constantly trying out new things because they got excitement from that. So I think if you're not going to have market inputs, if you're going to be developing these new spaces, of course, it's not only risky, but it also means you need to have some real intuitive understanding of that space, like Steve Jobs and Johnny Ive and all the people who worked with Steve Jobs. Otherwise, I think it could be quite difficult. You might just come up with outlandish things which nobody is looking for.
As we are running out of time, we'll take last three questions. So the mass consumption product companies do have to take market analysis, but in the production process need frugality, resources efficiency, which might go against trend, like use and throw products. What do you think might create a win-win situation here?
Just repeat the second half of the question. I couldn't.
I will repeat the whole question. The mass consumption product companies do have to take market analysis, but in the production process need frugality, resource efficiency, which might go against trends, like use and throw products. What do you think might create a win-win situation here?
So I don't know whether, I think mass consumption products, essentially they are getting their traction because of efficiency and efficiency in the complete sense. Let's look in the Indian context, which is a company that has really sort of driven consumption. I would say a good example is Maruti Suzuki. Maruti Suzuki came into India in 1983. So today we are 17, it's a long time, right? So it's now 30, 40 years since Suzuki actually came in. And when you look at Maruti, even today, they have a 50% approximate market share by volume in the small car business. How were they able to achieve it? They were able to achieve it by creating low cost throughout the product life cycle, through your acquisition, through your running cost, through maintenance, and of course, because of the reliability of the product, through your resale value as well. So it's not just throwaway kind of a product. It's a product which is giving value to the customer across the life cycle of the product. And they are doing that because they are giving you value for money. There's reliability embedded thanks to quality, thanks to their scaling up, thanks to their kind of way they have developed their vendors, everything that goes into building efficiency. So I don't agree about that it comes by just throwaway kind of products. It has to be embedded in your system that you're giving value but at low cost.
There was another question. Please give us a brief insight about the implementation of blockchain in the startup.
Okay, I am not a tech expert, guys, so I don't want to talk about blockchain and IoT and all that. I am only my focus is on managing innovation. So sorry, I'm not really in a position to answer that question. Only thing I can say is I'm a little bit of a skeptic at this point of time, because though blockchain's virtues have been touted for a long time now, I'm still not seeing enough successful commercial applications of blockchain. So I'm a little skeptical about blockchain simply from this perspective. But I must tell you, I'm not a technology expert on blockchain.
There's another question. How to bypass defense methodologies used by established organizations to protect themselves from new entrants?
How to get around? I think a good example of that is the last example I gave in my talk. You look at Gillette versus the Dollar Shave Club. Now, Gillette all these years was relying on its IP, and anytime anybody would launch a new product, they would go after that guy, file IP suits, essentially make life miserable for them. And they basically defended their IP very strongly, and of course they also had a strong brand, distribution, etc. But when a company like Dollar Shave Club came along, it didn't really compete with Gillette on Gillette's terms. He did not try to come out with the next best razor. He did not say, I'm going to give you the that whatever closest shaving experience, which better than what Gillette gives you. What they kind of redefined the whole thing in a way, looking at the total shaving experience, where they are looking at convenience, they are looking at ease of acquisition, they are looking at customization. Gillette gives you one product for all. They don't give you customization. So in a way, I think what the startup like Dollar Shave Club did was avoiding direct competition with Gillette on Gillette's terms. Anybody in the past who tried to compete with Gillette on Gillette's stuff never succeeded. But by completely shifting the arena, not changing the customer. The customer is still, of course, the man generally who wants a shave, but by shifting the arena away from the parameters on which Gillette traditionally competed, they really made it tough for Gillette to compete with them. So I think that's the trick really. You generally going into face-to-face competition with a very well endowed existing company is not going to be easy, but if you can change the terms of competition, if you can change the battlefield, then story can be quite different.
So here is the last question for the session. I'm a media professional. How do I scale my Jugaad connections to scale preparedness in tribal belt? Should I follow the established methodologies for outreach, or should we take collaborative method forward?
I don't know what is the meaning of that question. Yeah, anyway, how do I scale? Actually, I don't understand this question too well, but I think it's just like any marketing kind of a thing. You got to go back to the core 4 Ps, try to understand what is the value proposition you are providing, what's the place, what's the position, what's the promotion, all that stuff. So I think you really need to go back to basics and look at those rather than, I mean, there's usually difficult to find quick fix or Jugaad type solutions. I would suggest a more structured approach, looking at all elements and then seeing how can you reach out to the needs of that particular set of users of the media.
So here we come to the end of the question and answer session. Now over to Nobin.
Hello all. I would like to thank Professor for giving this wonderful session and question answer. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nobin.
Thanks.
Thanks for inviting me.
Thanks for attending this talk. It was a very wonderful session. I would really like to thank everyone for the patience you had. And most importantly, I want to thank Professor Raj Vagre and Satish Vasu Kailas for attending this talk. I also want to thank Adarsh and Kaustubh for the beautiful poster design, and Sam Sundar for assisting with the event. I want to thank all of you for being a part of this, and hope you really enjoyed the talk and got some really good insights from that, which will hopefully help you take quality decisions in the future.